What's going on, guys? As promised, this is part 2 of the Remix crash course that I created last week. So we looked at Remix, we talked about the fundamentals, we built this little blog app where we can create posts and they're getting added to a MySQLite database, and we're using Prisma as our ORM. So you're definitely going to want to watch the first video if you're going to go through this, okay, because we're going to pick up where we left off. Now I want to add authentication so we can log in and register and add a new post as a logged in user. So we're going to be dealing with sessions. And before we get to that, there is something I want to add, and that's validation for this new post form, because right now I can add a post without a title and body. So basically we just have this empty post. And this is something that I wanted to do in the last video and show you how we can return an error response. So we'll basically return a 400 error, and we'll show a little message saying, you know, title needs to be added or whatever. So let's go into our routes, posts, and then new.jsx. And we're going to go down to, actually first thing we'll do is bring in from Remix. I'm going to bring in use action data. So just like we have use loader data where you can get data returned from the loader, you can also get data returned from the action. And we'll actually go down here, and in our new post, let's say const action data, and set that to the use action data hook. And then we'll work on that after, because we need to set up our response from our action. And then I'm also going to bring in JSON, which is just a function because we want to return JSON as a response. All right, so let's close this up, and in our action, we're getting our title, our body, putting it into this object called fields, and then we're submitting to our database. So we want to go in between here and then do our validation. So I'm going to have an object called field errors, and set that to an object where we have title, and we're going to set that to a function called validate title, and we're going to pass in the title. And we'll do the same with the body. Okay, so body, and this is actually going to be called validate body, and we'll change this to body as well. Okay, so these two functions we have to create, which are going to be very simple. We're going to just go right above the action, and let's say function validate title. That's going to get passed in a title. And here we're just going to do a check. We'll check the type. So we'll say if type of title is not equal to a string for some reason, or if the title is less than, title dot length, if that is less than 3, then we're going to return an error. It's just going to be a string, and we'll say title should be at least 3 characters long. And you can do any kind of validation you want. Now for the body, same type of thing, so we'll just copy that, and let's say here validate body, and this right here, let's actually take that, and that, change those to body, and then instead of 3, we're going to do 10. So let's just say 10, and make sure we change this to body. And again, you can do any validations that you want. Now those functions are created, so in field errors, if these are true, then we'll have values in here. So we want to check for those values. So underneath field errors, let's have an if statement. We'll say if object.values, pass in the field errors object, and what that does is it basically creates an array of the values of this object. So then we can go ahead and say .sum, pass in Boolean here, and what this will do is if there's any errors, then this will be true, and I'm going to go ahead and just console log the field errors. And then as far as what we want to return in this case, we want to return a 400 response, but I also want to pass some data. I want it to send the field errors as well as the fields themselves, so we can pre-fill the form, and you can keep, you know, whatever you type in here, even if there's an error, it'll stay in. So we want to return that as JSON, so we'll say return JSON, pass in an object with our field errors and also our fields. And then this takes in a second argument of an object where we can set a status of 400. Okay, and this is what I wanted to show you in the first video, but it just kind of slipped my mind. So let's go ahead and save that. And if we come over here and I submit with no title or body, and we look down here, you'll see that we're getting a 400 response, and it's also showing our field errors. So now we have that data that we can put down here in our output. All right, so let's do that. And we can do that with the action data. So let's put this, we're going to go under the input for the title, and let's have a class of error. And then in here, we'll put a paragraph, and I'm going to open up some curly braces. We'll say action data. So action data dot field errors dot title. We want to check for that. If there's something there, if the text is there, then we'll output something else. Then it'll be null. Okay, actually, instead of doing that, let's just do this. Now, in this case, it might throw an error if these are undefined. So what we can do is just put a question mark after action data and after field errors. That way we won't get that undefined error. And then in here, what we'll output is the actual message, which is, actually I'll just grab this, which is going to be just that. All right, so let's save that. And actually, we don't want the curly braces around that. Okay, so now we're seeing title should be at least 3 characters long, right? If I come back to the post and I try to submit, we're seeing that error. Now, the problem that we still have is if I put, let's say, 1 character in and I submit, we get the error message, but what I put in goes away, and I don't want that. That's why we sent back the fields in addition. Right here, we send the fields in addition to the errors, so we can pre-fill that. So in our input, let's add a default value, and we're going to set that to action data, put a question mark there, and then instead of field errors, we're going to have just fields, question mark, and then dot title. So now you can see that 1 character it stays there. If I put another one, it stays there. Now we want to do the same thing we did here for the body, so I'm going to just copy this div, this error div, go right under the text area, and just simply change this and this to body. And as far as the default value, we'll do the same thing. So we'll grab that, and in our body here, pass in default value, just change that to body. Okay, so now we come here, we submit, good. If I just put 1 character in each one, we have the message, and the actual form input stays. So let's go ahead and try to submit. So we'll say test post. This is a test post, and we'll add that. Okay, so that works, good. So now that that's taken care of, we can move on to onto our authentication. So first thing we'll do is go into our Prisma folder and then our schema, because we're going to have to add a new model for our users, right? So we'll go right above the post model. Let's say model user. I'm going to copy the ID because, of course, we want an ID. I'm also going to copy the created and updated at. Okay, so we'll grab those, and then in addition to those fields, we're going to have a username, which is going to be a string, and it's going to be unique. Oops, that should be an at unique. And then we'll have a password hash, because obviously we don't want to store plain text passwords. So password hash will be a string. We're going to create a relation to our posts model. So here we'll say posts and set that to posts array. And then, I'm sorry, that should be just posts. This is singular. And then in our post model, we're going to have a user ID, which will be a string. And then we'll say user, because we need to set a relation here. This will have the type of uppercase U, user, and then we can do at relation. And in relation, we want to set fields, and in brackets, we'll say user ID, and then we add our references. Let's close that up. So references, we want to put in brackets here ID. So what we're saying is that this user ID, this field, should have a relationship with this ID field in user. And then in addition to that, we can add an onDelete here. We'll say onDelete and set that to cascade. And what that'll do is if we delete a user, then the post will be deleted as well, which of course is optional. So we'll go ahead and save that. And then before we push that to our database, let's change the seed file as well, because right now what we're doing is creating the title and body for some posts, and then we're going through those posts and we're adding them to the database. So in addition to this, I'm going to change DB here and here to Prisma. And in addition to this, we want to have a sample user or dummy user that we can use, so that in addition to title and body, we have a user ID. So here I'm going to create a variable called John, and we're going to set this to await and then Prisma.user, because this is the user model, and then we're going to create a new user. So this gets passed in an object with a data object, and then set the username to, we'll set it to John, and then he also needs a password hash. And the password hash I'm going to grab from, it's actually from the documentation, it's from the jokes tutorial that's in the documentation. And what this hash stands for is a password of Twix Rocks. So it's TWIXROX. So we'll be able to log in with a user called John with a password of Twix Rocks. Now, so far we just, we added the user, but down here where we add the posts, we want to add that user as the owner of those posts. So we'll create a data variable here, and let's set that to an object where we have the user ID set to John's ID. And then we also want to spread across the rest of the post data that's coming in from each post, which is coming from the title and the body down here. So we just want to pass in data to this prisma.post.create. All right, so that looks good. Let's save it, and then we're gonna close these up, and let's go down here and stop the server for a minute. So to add our new model to the database, we'll do npx prisma db push. Okay, so it's going to say our changes will be lost. That's fine, so we'll say yes. All right, so now we have our model set up. Now to seed our data, we can just run node, and then we can do prisma/seed, and then that should have added the data. And to check that out, we can do we could just reload the, I got to run the server. So we will see it, but you can also check npx prisma studio, and we'll be able to see the user as well. So let's open that up for a second, and you can see we have 4 posts in one user. If we look at user, we have our John user, password hash. If we look at our posts, now in addition to title and body and the other stuff, we have the user ID, and then we also have the user. All right, good. So now let's go ahead and run our dev server again. We're going to do npm run dev. Let's go back to localhost 3000, go to our posts, and we should have those 4 dummy posts that we created. All right, so we're ready to start to add our code for authentication. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to have a route. Let's create a folder here called auth. And then in auth, I'm going to have a file called login.jsx. And then just like the jokes tutorial in the documentation, we're going to have both the register and login functionality on the same form. We'll just basically be able to choose if we're logging in or registering. So first thing I want to do is just get the form displayed. I also want to have a link up here. So let's actually go to our layout, because that's where the nav is. So we want to go to root.jsx and come down to our layout, and I'm just going to take this, copy that down, and let's put We'll put our login here. So this is actually going to be /auth/login. And if you don't want auth, you can put login right in the root if you want to do that. All right, so now we have this login. If I click that, nothing shows because in my login JSX, I don't have anything. So let's create a function here, React function component, and let's say login. And if I go down here and just say login, then that should now show. Good. So like I said, I just want to kind of create the form at first just to get that displayed. So let's see, we'll come down here. Let's give this wrapper div. I'm going to give this a class name of auth-container, and these are just classes that are in the global style sheet. And then we'll do a page, let's say page header, and we'll have an h1. We'll say login. In addition to the h1, actually that's all we need for this, for the page header. And then we'll go under page header and let's do page-content. And in here is where we're going to have our form. The action we're submitting to this page, so we actually don't need that. But the method, we want to make sure we set that to a post. Okay, and then we'll have a field set. And this field set is going to have a legend. And we'll say login or register. Okay, and then let's see, underneath the legend, still in the field set, we're going to have a label. We don't need an HTML4, and in the label we're going to have our input, and this is actually going to be the type of radio. For the name, it's going to be LoginType, and we don't really need an ID. For the value, value is going to be LoginType as well. And then next to that we'll say login, and then what we'll do is copy, let's see, we'll copy the label and the input, paste that in, and then the name is still going to be LoginType, but we want to set the value here. I'm sorry, this value should be login, and then this one should be register. And we'll change the label here to register. Now let's go under the field set and let's add a class of form control. So this is going to be our username. So we'll do label for username, and then the input. So input will be the type of text, and the name is going to be username, ID, username, and yeah, we'll just do that for now. We are going to use the action data and set a default value in case there's an error, just like we did with the new post form, but we'll do that after. So let's just keep that for now. We are going to want to add an error field down here, so I'm just going to put the div for now, and then let's that should be under the input like that, still within the form control. And then let's grab this form control div and paste that in. This is going to be the password. Okay, so we'll take that, change that to password. Let's change that and that to password, actually the type as well. Okay, save that, and we should see our username and password. Good. Now for the button, that's going to go, let's see, it's right above the end, the closing form. So let's say button, we'll give this a class of btn and btn-block. And let's make sure we add the type of submit, and we'll say submit. Okay, so now we have, at least we have the form displayed. Now let's start to work on the action, right? So up top, let's bring in a few things from Remix. So we're going to import use action data, and let's also bring in JSON and redirect. So that's going to be from Remix. And then we are going to be using our database, so we'll bring in our DB, and that's going to be from, we can do tilde slash, and we want to go to utils slash our DB server. And yeah, that'll do it for now. We're going to have a session.server file as well, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So let's create our action function. So we want to make sure we export this. It's going to be export const action, and this is going to be a sync. Okay, and then the action, we're going to destructure in here and take the request. Okay, and then let's get the form data. So this is going to be done just like the new post. Remember, we add or we create a form, and then we can await the request dot and then form data. Okay, so that'll get us the form data. We want each field to be in its own variable, so let's get the login type, and we can use form dot get, and then we want to get from the name of login type. Okay, we're going to do the same for the username. Okay, and then whoops, let's do the same for password. Okay, so we get our login type, our username and password, and then we'll create an object of fields, which will have the login type, username, and password. Now we're going to do the same type of error checking that we did in the new post form. So let's do const fields or field errors, and we'll set that to an object. So we have our username, so we'll have a validate username, and that'll take in the username, of course, and then we'll also do the same with the password. Okay, then we're going to want to do the same thing we did in the new form, right? So I'm actually going to open up posts new.jsx, and after the field errors, we went ahead and just did this check. Now we're going to do the same thing in login, but I'm going to just, instead of returning this JSON right from here, I'm going to have a function called bad request. So let's change that to bad request, and we can take this status 400 out and just pass in the data, which will be the fields error and fields. And then right above the action, and this is in the new.jsx, right above the action, let's say function bad request, which will take in data and will return JSON, pass in the data, and pass in the object with the status of 400. Okay, so it'll do the same thing. We're just making it so now we have this bad request function. So I'm going to copy the bad request function. We can close up the new.jsx, and let's paste that right above the action in our login.jsx. And then we'll do the same check after the field errors. We'll say if object dot values, pass in our field errors. Whoops. And then let's do dot sum boolean. Okay, so we want to check that, and then we'll return bad request, and we'll pass in here our field errors and also our fields. Okay, so now if I try to submit without username and password, we should get a 400 down here, and now we can handle the errors by going to the login function and creating our action data, or a variable to hold the action data. So this should be just action data. Set that to use action data. All right, and then let's see, for the field set here where we have the input for the login type, I'm going to add a default checked, or default check. So default checked, we're going to set that to, and we want to say if not action data question mark dot fields question mark dot login type. So if there's no login type, then we're going to want this to be checked. Or if the login type is selected and it's login, so we'll say or action data question mark dot fields question mark dot login type if that is equal to login. Okay, and then let's see, for the username, let's go down here. We already have the div with the class of error. So in this error, let's say if action data question mark, and now we're checking the field errors, and we want to check for the username. All right, so if that's there, then we're going to display that. Yeah, username should be at least 3 characters long. We still have the issue we had before. If I put 1 character, it's going to go away. So we also want to add a default value onto the username, and we're going to set that to this right here. Okay, so action data field, it's actually going to be fields, not field errors. Fields username. Okay, and then we want to do the same stuff with the password. So I'm going to just grab that div. Password, we'll just change these to password. And then we also want the default value. Take that and put that in here and change that to password. All right, so at least we have that check. So now we're going to want to handle the login or register. So in the action, after we do all the field checking, so right here, we're going to add a switch and check the login type. And this is what they do in the documentation if you want to use that as kind of a supplement to this. So we're going to have a case of login, and basically what we're going to do to log in is first find user, then we want to check user, meaning check their username, make sure the passwords match all that, and then we want to create the user session. So that's to log in. And then let's do another case here. Let's say case register. Oops, we need quotes around that. So case register, and in that case we're going to want to check, we'll say check if user exists, and then we want to create the user, and then we want to create the user session. So whether we're creating a user, whether we're registering or logging in, the end goal is to create a user session. Right, now we'll also have a default here, so under that case let's say default, and for the default we're going to return a bad request, and let's pass in here an object with the fields, and then we're going to pass a form error and just say login type is not valid. So it has to be either login or register. Let's just clear this up. All right, so let's start out here by dealing with the login, right? So we're going to have a separate file where we do the actual login stuff and the session stuff. So we're going to create that, and that's going to be in our, let's see, close that stuff up. That's going to be in app utils, and that's going to be called session.server. And we'll go ahead and use TypeScript here as well. Now when we create our password, obviously we type plain text in here, but we need to then hash the password and store it in the database. So I'm going to just go ahead and I'll just open up a new terminal, and we're going to install something called bcrypt. So npm install bcrypt, and that will be used to hash our password. So we want to bring that into our session server file. So let's say import bcrypt from bcrypt, and then we're also going to bring in our DB, our database from, and that's right in the same folder, so just /DB server. And then we want to bring in something called create cookie session storage from Remix. We're also going to bring in redirect. So that's what we need to import. And then let's have a function here. This will log in user. So export an async function called login. It's going to take in an object with a username and password. Okay, and then in here, let's go const user. Then we want to await DB and then the DB and the user model, and we're going to call a function called find unique and pass in here an object with a where object, and we want to match the username. Okay, so that will check for the user, nothing to do with the password yet, just the user. But if it doesn't find a user, then we want to return from this function, we want to return null. All right, now if the user does match, we want to move on to check the password. Okay, so let's do const is correct password, and we're going to set that to await bcrypt. And bcrypt has a function called compare. What that does is it takes in the plain text password, which is just password, that's what's passed into the function, and then we also want to take the user that was found and take the password hash, and then that compare function will do just that. It'll compare it, it'll give us a true or false. So if not is correct password, then we want to return null, and if so, then we want to return the user. So now let's go back into login.jsx, and up top we want to import that login function, and that's going to be from the utils/session server. Now down here where we have our switch, we want to find the user, so let's say const user, set that to await login, and say username password. So that'll get the user. Then we want to check the user, so we'll say if not user, then we want to return a bad request, and in that bad request will be the fields, and in the field errors we're going to set that to an object with username and set that to invalid credentials. Okay, and it doesn't matter if it's because the user wasn't found or because the password didn't match. You don't want different messages because that could be a security risk. You just want to set invalid credentials no matter what. So now if we were to try this, if I put in a user that doesn't exist, we get invalid credentials. If I put a user that does exist with no password, with the wrong password, also invalid credentials. If I put the user and the correct password, which is Twix Rocks, then we don't get that. It doesn't do anything else. We haven't done any of the session stuff yet. So that's what we're going to do now. So back in our session server file, let's create, actually there's a couple things we want to do before we actually create the function. One, we need to have a session secret. So let's say const session secret and set that to process.env and then session underscore secret. So basically we want to have a environment variable of session secret, which can be set to anything, but you want to set that in your .env file, which we'll do in a second. So I'm going to say if not session secret, then let's throw new error and just say no session secret. All right, now in your .env, so if you don't have a .env, you should have one because it should have your database URL. That should have been created when you set up Prisma. But you just want to add this as well. So this can be set to anything. I just set it to secret, but you can set that to any string. Just make sure it is set. And then we need to create our session storage. So let's actually let's put a comment here and say create session storage. Here we'll say get session secret. Okay, so let's say const storage and set that to, this is where we use this create cookie session storage and pass. So basically we're creating a cookie as a session here. So we want to say cookie, and then we're going to set that to an object with a bunch of values. First is going to be the name. You can call this anything. I'm going to call it remix blog underscore cookie, underscore session. And then for secure, we want to set this to true if we're in production. So we can say process.env.node underscore env and say if that is equal to production, because then this will be true and secure will then be set to true. And then it takes in secrets, so it takes in plural secrets with an array, and we just have our session secret we're going to put in that array. And then let's see, same site for that, we're going to use lax. So you can use lax, strict, none. We're going to use lax. And then for the path, I'm going to say just slash, just the root. For the max age, we're going to set this to 60 days. So let's do 60 times 60 times 24 and then times 60. All right, and then HTTP only, we want to make sure we set that to true. So this is an HTTP only cookie. And then we're ready to create our create user session function. So we'll say create session. So we want to make sure we export this async function called create user session. Forgot function. And this is going to take in the user ID, and we are using TypeScript here, so we'll set this to string. And then we also have a redirect to, which is a string as well. And let's say const session, and we're going to await. So storage, which we just created, there's a method called getSession. Okay, so getSession. Then we want to set the user ID to that session. So let's say session.set, and we're going to pass in the string of user ID, which is the key, and then the value is going to be the user ID that's passed in to the function. Okay, then we want to return redirect, and we're going to pass in here redirect to, which comes in as a argument. And then we can pass an object here with headers, and this is where we want to do our set dash cookie and set that to await storage dot and then commit session, and then we pass in our session. Okay, so now we can go back to our login JSX and we can bring in that function along with login. We'll say create user session. And let's see, we're going to go right here and let's return create user session. We're going to pass in our user.id, and then the redirect will just do /posts. All right, so that should allow us to log in and create a session. So let's hit login. Let's do John and let's do Twix rocks. Submit, we get redirected. Never mind this is just my last pass thing. And then we can check this in our Chrome tools or Firefox, whatever dev tools you're using, and go to application, and then down under storage and cookies you'll see our remix blog session, which is just this long string value. All right, so that's how you can tell that we're logged in at the moment, because there's no other identifier that we're actually logged in. So next thing we'll do is create a function in our session server file to actually get the user. So let's go back into session server.ts and we'll go right under here and let's say we'll have a function to get the user session and we'll have a function to get the user. All right, so this one here, let's say actually we want to export function get user session and pass in the request, and we can give this a type of request. And then let's return storage. So storage.get session, and to get the session we can do request. So request, we have our headers, and in the headers we can do get and then cookie. Okay, so that will get the current user session. And to get the user, we'll say get logged in user. We can export, let's say function, actually let's make this async. So export async function get user, and that's going to take in request with the type of request. All right, and then we'll do const session, and we can actually call the function we just created called get user session, and that takes in the request, so we'll just pass that in. Okay, so now we have this variable of session. To get the user ID, we'll say const user ID, we'll set that to session.get, and we want to get the user ID. Okay, and then what, I put an extra S in here. All right, so now let's check, let's say if no user ID, or we'll say if the type of the user ID is not equal to a string. So if that's true, then we want to return null. If it's not, then let's we'll have a try catch here. And in the try, we're gonna say const user, and we'll set this to await db.user. And then we're gonna use find unique. And in find unique, we'll pass in an object with a where object, and we want to say where the ID is equal to the user ID from the session. Okay, and then in the catch we'll just go ahead and return null. All right, so we can get the user, pass in the request, get the session, get the user ID, see if it's there. If it's not, then return null. If it is, then we're going to match it to the user in the database that has that ID. All right, oh, I forgot to return the user. So we get the user and then we return the user. So now that we can get the user, let's show a logout button here instead of that login if the user exists. So remember this nav bar, I have that in my layout that is in my root JSX. So I'm going to go to my root JSX and we'll close that up, and we're going to bring in here a couple things. So one is going to be the use loader. So we want use loader data, because when we get the user, we're going to have to do it in a loader. And then we also want to import our getUser function. So let's say getUser, that's going to be from our session server file. And then we're going to create the loader. I'll go right above the app here. So let's say export const loader and set that to async. Okay, and then this is going to take in right here an object where we're going to get the request. And let's get the user. So user equals await get user, and that takes in the request. So that will get us the user. Then we want to create a data object and just pass the user in there. And then we're going to return from the loader, we're going to return data. Now we have our use loader data hook, so down in the layout, if I want to get that user data from the loader, I can say const, and I'll just destructure the user and get that from use loader data. And then what we'll do is under posts right here, I'll open up some curly braces and we'll say if user, then show something else, show something else, and the else is going to be this login link. So I'm going to cut that, put that in there. And then in here, so if there is a user, we'll have a list item. And we're going to actually have a form to log out, because remember we can have an action, and that's what we'll do. We'll have a separate logout route with an action in it that we can submit to. So here, let's do form. And since I'm not submitting to this file, I'm not submitting to the root, I want to submit to auth/logout. Okay, and then also add a method of post. All right, and then inside the form, we're just going to have our button. We'll do btn class, and let's make sure we add a type of submit, and we'll say, let's say logout, but I'm also going to put the person's name. So we'll do logout, and then we have access to that user object, which has a username on it. So now when I save that, you'll see it says logout John up here. So now we'll take care of the logout. Remember, that's getting submitted to an action in auth/logout. So we're going to want to create that route. So inside routes auth, I'm going to create a logout.jsx. And from here, I'm going to import from Remix, I want redirect. So from Remix, and then we're going to have a logout function in our session.server, because that's where all that kind of functionality goes. So let's do from, and then we'll do _utils session server. And in here, of course, we need an action, right? Actually, we want to export const action. Okay, because this action is what is being submitted to when we click on this. And we're just going to take the request from that, and then I'm going to do return logout, which is a function we haven't created yet in our session file. And then I want to redirect, so I can do that from the loader. So we'll say export const loader and set that to here. We're just going to return redirect, and let's just redirect to the home page. All right, so now we need to create this actual logout function so that when we submit, it calls that. So let's go, we can close up the logout.jsx. Let's go back to our session.server, and then for the logout, we'll go down here, let's say logout user. Actually, we'll say logout user and destroy session. That's really what logout is. So let's export async function logout, and this is going to take in, say, request with the type of request, and we'll say const session, because we need to get our session. We do that with await, and then storage dot get session. Again, we pass in our not redirect request dot, and then from the headers we want to get in here and then cookie. Okay, so that will get the session. Then let's return redirect, and we're going to return to, let's do /auth/logout, and then an object with headers, and here is where we want to set dash cookie, and instead of setting it, we're going to destroy the session. So we can do that with await and then storage dot, and there's a destroy session method, and then we just want to pass in our session. All right, so that will completely log the user out. So now let's try it. We'll go up here and click on Logout, and now if you go ahead and look in your application tab, you can see remix blog session has no value. All right, if I log back in, so log back in, let's say John and Twix rocks, submit, and now I can see the button here and I can see the remix blog session. But I'm going to log back out because now what we want to do is the register, which is going to be pretty similar except we're just creating a new user. So let's go back to our root.jsx. I'm sorry, not root, we're done with that. Let's go to our login.jsx, and here we already have the case for the login. That's all set. Now we're going to work in register. So we want to check if the user exists. We'll create a variable. We'll say user exists, and we'll set that to await db.user. And we can use find first, and then we'll pass in here where. Want to match the username. Okay, so that will get the user. And then we want to check, of course, so we'll say if the user exists, then we want to return a bad request, because this is, remember, this is registering. So we don't want to create a user that is already there. So let's return a bad request, and let's pass in an object with fields, and we'll say field errors. Set that to username, and I'm actually going to use backticks here, so we can say user, and then we can do username already exists. Okay, and we can test that out. We'll go ahead and save that. I'm going to go to register and let's say John and submit, and I get user John already exists. So let's continue on here. After that check, we want to create the user. So we'll do const user, and let's set that equal to, actually we don't have the register function yet, so let's just put a pin in this and jump over to our session.server.ts, and let's see, we'll put this right below the login, which is right here. So login ends here. We'll say register new user. So export. Did we do an arrow function here? No, let's export async function register. Okay, so register is going to take in same thing, username, an object of a username and password. All right, and then let's do const, because remember we need to hash the password, so we'll say const password hash, set that to await, and then bcrypt has a method called hash. So we're going to pass in here the plain text password, and then the number of rounds, we'll use 10, and then we can return db.user.create and pass in a data object with the username and the password hash. And that's it. So should be pretty simple. And then back in our login.jsx, let's bring in the register. So we already brought in login, create user session. I'm going to bring in register as well. And then we'll go back to where we were. So right here we check to see if the user exists, then we create the user. So we'll do const user and set that to await, and then we can call register, pass in an object with username, password, and then let's say if not user. So if the user didn't get created, then we're going to return bad request with fields, and we'll say form error, and we'll just say something went wrong. Okay, so that will register the user. Then we need to create the user session, which we already have that function, so there's nothing else we have to do except return, create our user session, pass in the user.id of the new user, and then redirect to /posts. Alright, so let's try to create a new user. I'll go to my login. I'm going to choose register though, and submit. And now you can see up here it says Logout Brad. So I created my user and I created a new session. And now what we want to do is make it so when we submit a post, it's associated with that user. So if we go to new post and we fill that out, we want the user ID to be set as well. So let's we'll close up this stuff and let's open up posts or routes and then posts and then new.jsx. Okay, and then I'm going to import, and what I want to bring in here is getUser. So we're going to import that from, let's see, utils/session.server, and let's go down to the action. So this is the action for when we submit the post form, and right here I'm going to say const user and set that to await getUser, which takes in the request. Okay, so that will get me the user. Now, down where we actually submit to the database, so right here, right now we're just setting data to fields, which is the title and the body. However, what I'm going to do here is for data, I'm going to set that to an object, and I'm going to spread across the fields, so the title and body, and then I'm going to also add a user ID and set that to the user from getUser and then .id. Okay, and that should be it as far as being able to associate the post. So let's say new post. I'm going to say I'll call this Brad's post. I'll just say this is a test post from Brad. We'll submit that. Okay, now let's open up Prisma Studio. So we'll say npx Prisma Studio, and now we can see, if we look at right here Brad's posts, you can see all the IDs for these other posts are the same, but this one's different. And if we look at the user, we have Brad. All right, cool. So the next thing, I don't want to be able to delete. Right now I can come to one of these other posts that aren't mine and I can delete them. So I want to make it so if I click this, it doesn't work, but then also make it so we can't even see the delete button if it's not our post. So remember, this is in the, let's go to the routes, posts, and then the post ID.jsx. That's the single post page. And I want to bring in here, let's say import, we're going to bring in getUser from, and that's going to be from utils/session.server. And then let's go down to our action. And in the action, remember we check to see if it's a delete. So I'm going to go right in there and then get the user. So we'll say const user and set that to await getUser, pass in the request, and that will get our user. Now where we do the actual delete, which is right here, I'm going to wrap that in a condition. So I'm going to say, first off, make sure there's a user. So if user and the post dot, and remember the post has a user ID field, if that is equal to the user dot ID, meaning the user that I just brought in, that's the get, I could even call this get logged in user. And then if that's true, then we'll go ahead and do the delete. All right, so let's save that. So I come over here, this post is not mine. If I delete, JavaScript performance tips, it just skips this and it just redirects. And if I click on my post and delete, it actually deletes it. Now I want to make it so that this button doesn't even show on posts that aren't mine, and we can do that pretty easily. So we already brought in getUser. Now in the loader, I want to get the user. So right here, let's say const user and set that to await getUser, and we need to pass in the request, which right now we're not getting, so we've got to make sure we pass that in here as well, request and params. And then from the loader, we're returning post, but we'll also go ahead and return user. And then down here where we have the post from the use loader data, we can also get user. And then where we have the form to delete, we'll go right above that, and I'll say if the user.id is equal to the post.userID, then we'll go ahead and show this form. So I'll cut that from here and we'll put that right in here. So now if I save that, I see no delete button on this post. However, if I create my own post, now I have a delete button and I can delete it. All right, so hopefully this video helped you out in terms of, adding authentication to a Remix application. Obviously, there's so many different ways to do the same thing, but hopefully this gives you a good idea on how to get started with this. So thanks guys, thanks for watching, I appreciate it, and I will see you next time.